Welcome to the Restoration Activation Project video commentary series. Hi, Marianne here, and thank you for joining me. In this commentary, I'm going to be I'm asked a lot of times by clients how I think things are going to play out in terms of convergence point related unfoldment, as we get closer to the convergence point and perhaps just beyond the convergence point. Curious about that. And of course, I do not have a crystal ball. I do not, quote, know exactly what's going to play out. Now, having said that, I do have some knowings around it and various impressions I've received and so forth. So that's what I'm going to be getting into today. This an exploration and sharing with you some of my own viewpoints and hypotheses around potential unfoldments and basically how I've arrived at them. But first, I want to remind you, if you have not visited the link below, an important message and special opportunity for sincere self-mastery embodiment aspirants, I strongly encourage you to do so. If you are a sincere aspirant and you're serious about stepping up your game, about doubling down on your self-mastery efforts at this critical turning point, then you'll want to read that page from beginning to end. There's a lot of really important information there about what's going on and a special, very unique, but limited time and limited participant opportunity for you. Again, there's a lot of information on that page, and I strongly encourage you to visit it, take your time reading it and absorbing it, but don't take too long making your decision because it is a limited number of participant and limited time offer. Very pertinent to what's going on right now and in terms of how you can amplify and accelerate your efforts to counterpoise those of you what's going on right now, and those of you who are progression encoded souls, but doing so in ways that don't contribute to the further unfoldment of what we're witness to now. That's very critical. The way you go about counterpoising what's going on is critical. Not just that you counterpoise and draw your lines in the sand, but the way you go about it is critical. So please, if you are a sincere aspirant, if you're a self-mastery warrior, and you really get what's going on right now, and that this is all about doing everything you can in this incarnation, because, gee, if you haven't already figured it out, the mind-body complex isn't going to be around forever. You have a limited amount of time on this planet, this mind-body complex, to do the work that you were encoded to do. So time is critical. Like it or not, that's the truth at the material layer of this reality. So now, getting into this episode. In the prior commentary, the Epochs, Acceleration, and Shadow Revelations commentary. I talked about the fact that there are many different cultural, esoteric teachings, religious teachings around the ages and cycles of humanity, and addressed some of the key things that they had in common. So if you have, and along with many other things. So if you haven't watched that video, I'd recommend that you go back and watch that one before you get into this one. It'll make more sense. I'm going to touch on some of the things that those teachings and traditions have in common, but in a little bit different, from a different perspective today. Another thing that they all have in common is their own various interpretations and assertions around how things will unfold. As this cycle transitions into whatever's coming next. And all of the ones that I mentioned, speak to times, the ultimate goal, the ultimate end, except for the Greek and Roman ages of humanity, Hesiod's version, Greek philosopher Hesiod, and Roman poet and philosopher Ovid, they don't speak to this aspect. They present their ages of man in terms of, basically that's it, folks. But all of the others that I touched on, and many others, and keep in mind that those teachings are some of the newest of these cycle traditions in various esoteric and exoteric spiritual religious teachings and cultural traditions. So in keeping with a more modern, more regressed perspective, they don't get into what's going to happen after the fourth and fifth ages of humanity. But the others do. And what they basically point to is their own versions and interpretations that ultimately this reality, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, I'm just sort of, what I'm talking about here is sort of an amalgamation of all these interpretations, that ultimately this reality will transition to, at least the density dimensions of this reality will transition to, the co-creational venue will transition to a much more, or at least incrementally more, progression-oriented reality. There are several different opinions around the Hindu yuga cycles. I've read accounts that relate that there will either be an incremental transition back into the third cycle. The name of that cycle escapes me right now, but from the Kali Yuga back into the next more progressive cycle that came just before. And then there are accounts that discuss that assert that the Kali Yuga will transition back to a Satya Yuga, the apex, the highest order, the most progression oriented cycle. something along those lines. But they all point to, not just in Hinduism, but these other cycles and eras and ages and worlds and that I touched on in the prior video, that ultimately that this reality will transition into a more, some degree, some level of a more progression-oriented reality and cycle, or excuse me, cycle. And then that means, of course, because this reality is directly tied into those cycles, then this reality, you know, many of them speak to, the ones that speak to a complete, you know, a return from the nadir cycle that we're in right now back into an apex cycle, and others to a more incremental. But at some point that this reality will be either more progression oriented or will return to some version of a, quote, its original state, a sort of paradise, if you will. So they all have that in common. However, that's punctuated by various descriptions of what's going to happen before that happens. Hinduism speaks to a certain god coming down and basically kicking butt and taking names, causing general havoc and cleaning up of this world. And that those who survive will be the ones that will carry on with the new world. But there will be all sorts of, quote, hell on earth before them. The others point to similar things, you know, the Hopi tradition, the Aztec traditions, the various other traditions point to the same kinds of unfoldment. But ultimately, this reality, including this planet, will revert to its, basically to its original state at some point. So they all have that in common, and I thought it was important to point that out. Because, as I said, my own assertions around this are based on years of research into, you know, various exoteric and esoteric teachings, not just around these things, but other related things, along with intense personal observation of what has actually been going on in my lifetime, historical pointers, markers, you know, recorded history, as distorted as it is full of a number of markers, science around this, various levels of science, along with my own intuitive impressions, you know, and my understandings of the principles of creation, the differences between understanding, you know, the differences between and how they work, progressive and regressive consciousness, the nature of those two qualities of consciousness and how they interact, my own understandings around the different planes of existence, the different layers of human consciousness, the 3D aspect of this reality, what's unfolding on multiple levels, and I'll get more into that in a minute, and my understandings of time in the 3D layer of reality, and my understandings of some of the, limited as they are, of course, of the fourth and perhaps some of the higher density dimensions of this reality, and like a lot of deductive reasoning as well. I mean, combining all those things. And again, these are just my own perspectives and hypotheses. So take them with a grain of salt. I do. In light of what I said earlier and the turmoil that is predicted actually make a lot of sense. And this gets into what I now refer to, and now, and other people as well refer to as a and it won't just be this planet, it will be the whole solar system, this corner of reality, and at least some of the planets in this solar system will undergo self-impose, because it's encoded within them, a reset process. Basically, the restoration of the original planets, stars, and so forth, or the original celestial bodies in this solar system. And of course, that won't include certain bodies, certain celestial bodies, for example, the moon. But these reset processes are basically, in a nutshell, and I get into some of the details on the web page, the important message and special opportunity for sincere self-mastery aspirants page. I touch on some of the aspects of the reset process. And they're the kind of things that would account for many references to horrible climate shifts and sudden drastic climate shifts, more modern references in terms of the reversal of the magnetic poles, horrible volcanoes and earthquakes and flooding, or perhaps even the sudden onset of another ice age. So this could unfold in many different ways. It's not going to be as simple because we're in the material layer of being, and who knows how long this transition process would last. Now, before I get into some of the more specific aspects of my hypotheses, in a nutshell, my understanding of a reset, in other words, in terms of restoring this reality's self-restoration of its original features and qualities, would necessarily entail shedding the third, second, and first density dimension features of this reality. In other words, the original, this reality in its original state, the lowest, in my understanding, the lowest density dimension of this reality was the fourth. The third density dimension and lower features of this reality are all reflections of the regression of human consciousness and all other consciousnesses that are functioning in this reality. I often I make reference to human consciousness, but I'm referring to, and it does relate to the human souls on in many aspects of this, but collective consciousness refers to all of the consciousness, the aggregate collective dominant quality of consciousness and co-creation that are from which the conditions, the types and qualities of conditions in this reality. So everybody that exists here, everything that exists here contributes to the unfoldment of the types and qualities of conditions of this reality to some degree and extent. This is how reality unfolds. This is what this reality is encoded to do. We're intimately interconnected, particularly human souls, not only with each other, but with this reality and this planet. We're encoded to, quote, co-create together. This reality was designed to support us, and we were meant to support it, to care for it, the stewards of this planet. And whatever life forms came to be, whatever life forms when we were at our apex, co-created. Yes, we co-created life forms. And this was sort of a nursery for different life forms before the usurpers came and started doing things like genetic tampering that go against, that transgress the code of conduct for this reality. It wasn't about tweaking life forms to our specifications. In other words, saying, okay, well, this particular life form, don't like it, so I'm going to mess with it. But we knew how to co-create in these bubbles, if you will, to project and to do our co-creational experiments without making them manifest. And once they became manifest, that life form was allowed to unfold organically. And we cared for them, these different life forms. Animals, vegetation, all of it. We were the stewards of all this, of this nursery. Now, looking at this from a more interdensity dimensional level, and keeping in mind that the original mind-body complex was nothing like it is today, this acutely regressed form that our souls function through in this reality, in this incarnation. And this reality was reflective of that. It was not dense. It was because the lowest density dimension was the fourth density dimension. It reflected the far less dense, unimaginably less dense physical form that humans' souls once occupied. And just to get some idea of fourth density dimension features, one way to do that is to think about the dream state. Not all dreams, but many people, because they have no mastery over the astral self, the astral aspect of soul. Because this reality has become so corrupt, so extremely regressive, that the lower astral realm, fourth density, that's a fourth density realm, plane of this reality, is infested with extremely regressive dominant entities and beings. Very highly regressive. But nevertheless, think about your dreams. Things turn on a dime. Boom. Or you can have the illusion of something lasting for a long time. Things, some of the beings that you encounter, some of these entities, they change form on a dime. One minute you're looking at what seems to be a human, the next minute you're looking at something else. But so time is an issue as well. Time in the fourth density dimension and higher layers of this reality. Time is nothing like it is this false perception of time as being linear in the third density dimension. In other words, you think a thought and boom, there it is. So this is why it's so important right now for sincere self-mastery aspirants to truly embody present moment awareness toward a whole different level of self-responsible co-creation. Truly becoming master of your thoughts and emotions, because those are the two potent co-creational tools that we were given. Getting really attuned with and attaining mastery of your three primary, your energy centers, the mind center, which relates directly to thoughts, the heart center, and the creative center. Those three primary energy centers whose emanations comprise your external energy field, which emanates the aggregate of the energies comprising your three energy centers. So we're talking serious self-responsibility, getting back to the way things were. This ties directly to the shedding of the third and lower density dimensions of this reality. And before I get into some of the specifics of that and some of the causes of potential massive earthquakes and climate related cataclysms and so forth, I want to get into other key indicators that the fourth density dimension features of this reality have already been bleeding through for some time now. And this is all getting ramped up during the acceleration toward the convergence point. Again, compressed time. That's a key indicator of that basic, quote, instant karma aspect of higher density, higher than third density dimensional realms, and the way time really unfolds, which is non-linearly. So that's connected and indicate, these features are bleeding through. And here's how that can be viewed and the indicators of that. More people than ever before are, including myself, and I'm not even someone who has that particular capacity. That's one of the lesser abilities, or one that I need to more fully develop. But I have seen so many things that are not of the third DD. They can't be explained away by technology, or at least not 3DD technologies. And this is rampant now, especially around sensitives. And there's a lot of sensitives incarnate right now. Individuals who are, whether they be human souls incarnate in these mind-body complexes or from other races and species. There are a number of highly sensitive beings here right now who are able to, and have been, some of them for most of their lives, been seeing things that others cannot, experiencing things that others haven't, or they're, others are experiencing them, but these individuals are experiencing them more from a 4DD's perspective, from the ground of being able to see, at least to some extent, and experience 4DD features. And I'll give you some examples of that. Not only things like compressed time, or perhaps what some, the Mandela effect, or experiences, some of the experiences I've had of like a little glitch in the timeline, those kind of things. I've described some of those in earlier commentaries if you're interested in checking those out. But for example, one of the things that I've been looking into recently, making note of, just in the recent months, but even leading into all of this massive contraction, the COVID-19 thing, even leading into that, more and more people are awakening to, even those who haven't had them before, various types of, quote, paranormal experiences. Very much on the upswing. And I'll give examples of that. And I've been reading accounts that in recent months, there have been these massive crowd level, in many cases, sightings of various types of UFOs. Now, that's not to say that all of these UFOs are necessarily features or crafts from different density dimensions. They could just be more advanced technologies that the overseers have implemented and are using as part of their overall agenda to prepare people for the, quote, getting used to the idea of aliens, okay? Because apparently the usurpers, the non-human usurpers of this reality, have in mind to make themselves, perhaps have some intention of making some of themselves visible to us again. Because way back when, these so-called gods, these what the regressed humans considered to be gods or goddesses and so forth, these special beings, so-called advanced beings that had nowhere near original human capacities to co-create, nothing close to original human capacities for technology, advanced, truly advanced technologies, organic technologies. But so some of what people are seeing might be more of that sort of thing in terms of sightings in the sky. However, there are many more reports. I've just noticed like a really big increase in reports of things like cryptids. And there's several sites where you can go check that out. I know you're all familiar with James Bartley. Checking out and following the links that he, the many of the people he's interviewed, many of the other people, you know, who do research into cryptids, various kinds of cryptids. In other words, including things like Sasquatch, these interdensity dimensional beings. All sorts of them. Things like, quote, dogmen, and wolf-like, you know, human-wolf hybrids and so forth, that now you see them and then you don't. Interdensity dimensional, moving back and forth through vortexes, for example, you know, between this density dimension and others. So those kinds of sightings are really on the upswing. Speaking from my own little corner of the world, in the last, I mean, I've worked with individuals who have had, you know, various MyLabs and people who have undergone alien abductions and or some version, you know, but these physical abductions that occurred in the past, they've sort of transmuted more into these, you know, interdensity dimensional kinds of experiences. Many of them being military, sort of military training of sorts. This could involve cloning and all sorts of things, but not so much abductions as being consciousness and our soul being transported, typically, but not always, during the dream state into different density dimensions. All of these, and the many of these vortexes that the military and non-human beings, you know, their military minions, are artificially created vortices. But I want to speak a moment to some of these vortices, many of them being artificially created or artificially manipulated, that exist in this, you know, this reality. In the prior commentary, I spoke to the warring factions, the different non-human species and their various offshoot factions, squabbling over various parts and facets of this reality before we get to the convergence point, trying to lock in their dominion, so to speak, as we go into the convergence point, so that everybody's squared away. You know, this doesn't mean they'll stop warring on the quote other side, but laying down things now, you know, getting their turf squared away, not just, and this is reflected, you know, on this planet. You know, the politicos in the 3DD, most of them believe this is all about 3DD dominion, but a number of them are well aware the higher they are on the pyramid. In other words, most of these beings being the individuals that you'll never hear the names of, far above and beyond, pulling the puppet strings on the quote 13 primary ancestral bloodlines. But they understand what's at stake here going into the convergence point. And so as above, so below. As below, so above. All of this is going on right now. And a distinct possibility that could unfold in the 3DD is, you know, if people get pushed too far, there could well be wars. You know, a lot of bloodshed and violence over what's been going on. That's a possibility. These people that, you know, got their guns and ammo ready are going to react if they have the opportunity, if somebody comes banging on their door in the night. There could also be wars between the major powers on this planet, which would be a reflection of the non-human beings warring in higher dimensions over the loosh that they've been farming here, getting things, the genetic emanations, genetic encoding, the facets of that, the emanations that come from that, and however the different means that they exploit that. So if something like that unfolds here, know that it's because it will also be going on in the higher density dimension realms of this reality and beyond, in certain realities. So that's an aspect of all of this. Now, some of the other types of experiences, but even my own world, where I was headed with that in terms of the alien and my lab aspect, the increased activity in that area, more and more people having those kinds of experiences. But beyond that, people who have been on the planet for quite some time awakening to, with all these energies, this energy chaos that's going on right now, awakening to remembering my lab and or alien abduction related experiences that they never were attuned to before. Now, this largely happens as a result, this can happen also as a result of doing self-mastery progression work, of course, because we become more and more aware. We awaken to memories and things that have been deeply pushed deeply into the subconscious, either just as a result of our own mind not being able to cope, in combination with soul splintering, soul fragmentation, but also with the help of some of these non-human beings, technologies, these memories of these types of events. They try to, wipe them from memory. So in different ways, they use different means of doing that. I know that in my own little corner, just in the last, this has happened during the course of the many years I've been working with clients, but it's very noteworthy to me that just in the last few months, 3 or 4 clients that I've worked with came to me and have told me that they've awakened to memories of this sort of thing that they never had before. And others are saying that they're having experiences that they haven't had before. People that have been on this journey a long time. Now, they may still have repressed memories, but some people are having experiences that are just absolutely certain they never had experiences in childhood or anything. Now, the general premise is that those who have had these kinds of experiences, it typically starts from childhood and moves throughout their lives. But that's not always the case. Not now. I know that several of my friends in my little inner circle have shared this kind of information with me. 3 of them just in the last few months, 6 months or so, have told me that they was like, oh my God, what do you think about this? I remembered this. These are things, connections I never made before when I was a child, different experiences that I helped them piece together, and we look at and go, wow, this has been going on a long time with you. But they're only awakening to it now. Another key indicators of acceleration and the fourth density dimension features of this reality. Compressed time. accelerating the stirring of all these energies coming in, indicators of the nearing convergence point. But other types of so-called paranormal events, in addition to those I've already described, are, oh my God, in years, this has been very apparent to me for a number of years, and this too is increasing. Individuals who are seeing discarnate spirits, apparitions, shadow people, demons, just a massive increase in regressive interference. And being able to see these creatures that they wouldn't have been able to see before. Yes, some of them have been seeing things from the time they were children, but a lot more adults now are seeing things that are just, who were totally had no acceptance of this sort of thing. And in the blink of an eye, due to a personal experience, they go, wow, it's like, this is real, this is there, this is true. I totally rejected it before, but not now. So a massive upswing there. These more and more people being able to see these discarnate spirits and other entities and beings. This ties back into also some of these, the manipulation of some of these vortices, which, and this is has a direct relationship to how for millennia and increasingly you're aware of, or I would say most of my listeners are aware of, hosting and what that means. Hosting the consciousness of another being. Regressive, it would be a regressive, because progressive beings, by and large, make a point to never, because that would be a huge transgression, but to never insert themselves into the consciousness of another, into the mind-body complex. It's an extreme transgression. But much of this activity is a direct result of the regressive entity infested non-human overseers, non-human human hybrid overseers, and some of their higher level minions, and many lots of people engaging in black magic that has opened and in many cases trapped a number of these extremely regressive demonic type entities and beings in this reality by way of black magic. And you think this isn't a big deal? You think this is limited to like these satanic ritual groups and organizations? It's not. Let's take a look at the New Age spiritual community and the infestations there, the hijacking of that community. The vast majority of these so-called manifesting tools involve, unbeknownst to the users of these techniques, black magic, dark magic. In other words, and vast amounts of people use these techniques, but they're invoking, in other words, giving permission to regressive beings and entities into this reality, giving them permission to come into this reality, to the individual be playing host to these things. Look how popular it is again for people to be working with Ouija boards and things like that. Movies about that sort of thing that encourage younger people to engage in those kinds of activities. without a clue of what they're doing. So we've got all that going on. We've got this whole, and I'll tell you that a number of the overseers, non-human overseers, even at that highest level, they've invoked and tampered with to the point that many times, I assure you, they're feeling a bit out of control themselves. Because some of these entities and beings, they cannot be, not by other regressive beings, they cannot be, quote, dealt with appropriately. In other words, especially the forces of consciousness and beings from the underworld. That's what I'm talking about here. The underworld. The sub-density dimension underworld of the most extremely regressive dominant entities and beings. Demons, if you will. Which many people think that there are either aliens or demons, that aliens are only regressive entities presenting themselves in certain ways. Now, some entities have the capacity to do that, to present themselves in different forms. But there are alien beings. And granted, many of them are hosts, part-time and full-time hosts to regressive underworld entities. As above, so below. As below, so above. Now look at the number of hosts walking around on this planet. Perfect portals for, Instant Agent Smith from the Matrix movie. So things are really chaotic now. In the last commentary, I also spoke to several major shadow revelations. The 3 pandemics that are very apparent. The fear pandemic, specifically the fear of death pandemic, death of the mind-body complex, distorted addiction to it, leads to distorted fear of dying. And this plays out in many ways. And let's hit the interdensity dimensional level of how this plays out. A lot of these apparitions that people are seeing, these disincarnate spirits and apparitions that of humans, dead humans, who now, they're either a residual, quote, haunting, or they are an aware individual. There's a conscious awareness, there's interaction, conscious interaction between these apparitions or shadow people and all these different forms they can take. But those directly tie to the extremity of the addiction to the material layer of being pandemic. These discarnate souls cling to this reality even in death. Many of them don't know they're dead. And I'm not talking about sudden deaths. That can happen if a person dies really suddenly. Sometimes there is the lingering. They can linger. It takes a little while for them to realize that they are dead, that the body has died. But I'm talking about, I'm not just talking about that. I'm talking about many of these apparitions, they know they're dead. They've been hanging around for so long. They're so addicted either to the deep depression that they experienced here, the deep, intense anger, or the kind of individual they were in life, that perhaps a serial killer or an individual who was deeply depressed because they lost maybe a lot of family members around them, and they're caught and stuck in grief because they're so deeply addicted to the material realm that they cling and linger on after death. So these types of experiences are on the upswing and are noteworthy. They give clear evidence of the extremity of the addiction pandemic. And again, I got into that deeply in the prior episode, in the Epoch, Acceleration, and Shadow Revelations commentary just prior to this one. So all of these things coming together afford a really good bigger picture perspective and have contributed to some of my hypotheses around what might unfold, particularly around in terms of the reset. Now, there is another possibility. Doesn't mean that a reset won't occur, but that another possibility that, again, there can be sub-phases. That, in other words, this convergence point that we're nearing, before we get to that convergence point, there could be a much more intensely regressive phase of this cycle before the convergence point. And we're seeing evidence of that too right now. But in terms of the reset and some of the events that I described earlier, various climate-related cataclysms, massive earthquakes and so forth, volcanic activity, massive flooding, a quick switch back to a quick digression into an ice age, another ice age, and that sort of thing. That all ties in with the shedding of the third and lower density dimensions of this reality as in terms of the reset, because this is what would be happening. This would be necessary, a necessary part of the reset for this reality to self-restore its original organic state and features. Now, some of these cataclysm-like events that would unfold as a result of the shedding, and this won't be a snap overnight event, as I mentioned. And a lot of people are going to die. A lot of mind-body complexes will not survive this any more than they survived earlier cycle unfoldments into the convergence point. Although it's distorted, you can look to the Bible for this, these major the deluge. But there's, in other cultures, there's references to earlier extinction level events, such as massive fires and all, fireballs from the sky, perhaps massive earthquakes, and volcanoes. But some of the causes of these cataclysmic, certain cataclysmic events would be the shedding, the sudden, or however long it takes, of the certain features of particularly the third density dimension, as well as the second and first density dimension layers of this reality. Some of those comprising constituents would be electromagnetic energies, which are not native to this original reality, the original version of this reality. The shedding of extremely materially dense carbon atomic-based life forms. And I saw something the other day, and I looked it up, that I had never known before. The carbon molecule comprises 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons. Just thought I'd bring that, that was, I had forgotten that from years ago, and it came to my attention again recently. So that's interesting. So, the shedding of those, particularly, and so, some point or another, even if your mind-body complex, this mind-body complex doesn't go into the more extremely regressed unfoldments that are coming for whatever reason, some of the possible reasons I've already mentioned. But what's critically important, that's why at this point it literally is about soul survival. That's what we're talking about here. Some of the other constituents that would be shed that aren't native to the original organic form of this reality are, as I just said, dense, related to the density, these dense, low vibration celestial bodies that were not native to this solar system, and including, and in the case of this planet, the shedding, part of this process would involve the shifting of the density of this planet, which, in other words, the intense gravitational forces of this planet, because it is a much less dense, the fourth density dimension comprises much less dense beings and entities, as well as the actual celestial bodies themselves. One of the other things that will change quickly, there's been a lot of scientific reference to this, not in the context in which I'm presenting it, but there's a lot of scientific research that is pointing to the Earth's slanted orbit of the sun. In other words, its axial tilt, also known as obliquity, is going to change. And from my perspective, it would no longer be slanted. It would be perfectly vertical, no longer at a slant. And this is the kind of thing that can cause massive planet-level turmoil. Another thing that will go away is reincarnation technologies, as well as any false perceptions of time as being a linear, metered unfoldment. And those are just a few examples. Relating to the instant karma effect. Well, even souls that might survive, that, even material, mind-body complexes that might survive when this reset takes place, may not survive for very long. Can you imagine the drastic shock to these unaware mind-body complexes as to some of the new features that would be in place? Kind of like the people who survive, people who have survived massive radiation exposure, as a result of bombs and so forth, Chernobyl, things like that. That there's the first round of deaths, and then other deaths unfold after the fact, sometimes in fairly short order. So we kind of be like that. There will be layers of death. Now again, many of you listening to this will likely accuse me of being a doom and gloom and fear mongerer. But that's not the case. If you don't want to know the possibilities here, and many of them being quite likely, in whatever happens, however things are going to unfold, if we get into a much denser, much more intense, and there will be, these are coming, much more intense contractions, regressive consciousness, like we're experiencing now, much more intense than this, before the convergence point. It doesn't matter. There is two, even though it's, a lot of it is propagandic, it's information, truth mixed with lies. Some of these old teachings and writings, around the various epochs and ages of man and cycles, mixed in with lies, of course, distortions, like I mentioned in the prior commentary, wherein there is not any mention at all of the ages of man prior to these written, quote, historical records of epochs and cycles and so forth. So they're mixed in with lies too, but they all point to basically the same thing, what I call a reset. And others call a reset. So there's more information about that, as I said, on the message, the important message and special opportunity for sincere self-mastery aspirants page, as well as other key indicators of what's going on right now at the deeper, at the more higher level of awareness, conscious layer of being, the soul layer of being, primarily. So if you haven't visited that link yet, please do so. There's a lot of important information there. So those are some of my, another key thing, forgive me, I almost forgot, with regard to the splitting of timelines and a couple of other elements here. But there's a lot of talk, and I've mentioned it myself, around the splitting of timelines. The primary timeline now, with many other regressive timelines feeding in, if you will, to the primary regressive dominant transhumanism timeline. And because of the dual nature of this reality, that timeline reveals to us our inherent potential, since we co-created that timeline, our inherent potential for co-creating much more progressive timelines. And they may not end up being a part of this reality if in fact, at least for some time, if in fact if there's going to be a much more intensely regressive phase right before the convergence point. But the splitting of timelines and how that might play out and how that might look, this is part of the key part of the work, is establishing, getting much more progression-oriented timelines in place. And the more, quote, consistent they are, in other words, the more of us who come together as unique individuated consciousness, not as a hive mind, but help establish timelines instead of all these myriad different progression-oriented timelines, helping to co-create, using our energies and so forth to establish those timelines, as one stronger timeline, so to speak. And this is part of one of the aspects of the Progressive Co-Creation Network that I'm making available now. A key aspect of this. And not by way of dark black magic, which is all about forcing egoic will rather than aligning, co-creationally aligning with an organic flow of core self-will, but forced egoic will of manifesting, whether it be money or relationships or whatever it may be. That's a deep transgression of the code of conduct for this reality. Dark, black magic. So it's not about that. It's not about co-creating these more progression-oriented timelines. Has nothing to do with that. And it has nothing to do with these, what I personally find to be pretty creepy and dangerous, group meditations where all sorts of regressive entities and beings are attracted like bees to honey. Nothing like that. But so the splitting of the timelines, and the way I suspect things would sort of play out would be sort of along the line of perhaps the two, the differing timelines, the split, those on the different timelines wouldn't even necessarily have any memory or notice of the split. Now, those on a more progression-oriented timeline might well have, depending upon the extent to which they've progressed on their self-mastery journey, might have more awareness of the split. Especially if they've progressed to the point where they have no addictions or distorted attachments to the third density dimension of this reality, or to the mind-body complex as it is. No, the fewer the attachments, the more likely you are able to transition to a higher vibration timeline. That's what facilitates it. Lack of attachment. It's all about clearing attachments instead of clinging to this 3DD aspect, unnatural aspect of this reality. So the greater extent to which you've progressed in your self-mastery work, the process of self-mastery and attainment toward embodiment, it's quite likely that we would have some awareness of the splitting of the timelines. And this would sort of play out like if the timeline split, if this reality can support two primary timelines as it gets more increasingly regressive, may not be able to support two such divergent timelines. It may only be able to support, quote, support the primary transhumanism timeline and only other regressive dominant timelines. It may not, this reality as it is may no longer be able to support, which means that these more progression-oriented timelines will not even necessarily any longer be a part of this reality. They can unfold in different, not only perhaps different density dimensions of this reality, and that's quite a possibility, but may even could unfold in other realms. So these are some of the things that I look at and explore. I don't have any attachment to them. I don't believe any of them. These are just exploration. I don't hold to, I am not attached to any of them, because that would just be another, I don't believe them. I look at them, explore, and because to be attached to them or quote, take them as belief, fold them in as a belief, just keeps me attached to this reality, to this layer of this reality, I should say. So I hope you found this, again, this has nothing to do with your beliefs. I just thought I would share, because I get asked this all the time, to, what my impressions around possible future unfoldments. And the basis of, from which my hypotheses have unfolded and why, deductive reasoning based on understandings of how reality works in terms of the principles of creation, the qualities of consciousness, the different qualities of consciousness, the code of conduct for this reality, and understandings about the way this reality works in terms of planes of existence and energy and that sort of thing. So I hope you found it interesting, if nothing else. But I also hope you'll take it to heart in terms of your self-mastery progress work, and that you will, if you haven't already, visit the link below and take your time and really look at what I'm offering. Read it to the end of the page. If you think this isn't a program for you, read to the end of the page. Well, that's all I'll say. Just read to the end of the page. And keep in mind that it is a limited number of participants and limited time offer. So I hope you found this, at the very least, found this commentary expansion of your consciousness, and inspiring you to do your own investigations, to come to your own interpretations of what might unfold, your own understandings. When I present my theories and hypotheses, it's never about, the last thing I want for you to do is believe them. It's all about inspiring you to, and that's what self-mastery work does too. It enables you to become more aware of and co-creationally aligned with, and a transducer of core self level awareness and understandings and of how things work. Intuition. That's one of the things that happens. Expanded intuition just builds and builds upon itself as you progress in this work. And your ability to really start seeing things from every layer of being, bringing all of this knowledge together, connecting all of the dots, every layer across different, all the layers, not only the layers of your own being, but across planes of existence and so forth. This is one of the perks, people. This is what it's all about. Higher level of awareness understandings, and there, what unfold from that is higher level awareness, perceptions, perspectives, perceptions, from which our higher vibration states of being unfold and informing our co-creational choices towards higher vibration co-creation, more progressive dominant co-creation. So, a quick note, the next video that I post will be a fascinating interview that I'll be doing in the next couple of days with a true self-mastery warrior. This individual will amaze you in her, the extent of the things she's gone through, the wide range of events and experiences she has had and is still undergoing some of the results of those experiences, but the amazing progress and the momentum she's been able to build by ramping up her already amazing self-mastery efforts in progress, but by taking steps to really ramp things up. So stay tuned for that video. Until then, until we connect again, I wish you all the best on your journey. If you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, I invite you to do so. Or if you subscribe on my website, you'll be notified of things such as, different, not only upcoming video commentaries as they get published, but also different programs and offerings. As you'll have first shot at those. So until we meet again, be true to you and true to your unique journey, and find some way of stepping up your self-mastery attainment process efforts. Take care, and bye for now.